recommendations that we really felt we couldn't make without more sufficient data, but we were very concrete about here's the data that you need. I mean, the FCC as an agency has to be up to date with what what information it's getting, and it clearly needs better information about broadband. In addition, we said no business would commit essentially billions of dollars in various programs unless it had market tested it. So there are other very concrete recommendations about here's where we need to do pilot projects. Then we do make, where we thought we had the data or where there had been sufficient testing, we said we can make very concrete, granular, specific recommendations to, for example, reform universal service. As to the idea you had, it's actually not a recommendation of the plan. What we were saying was we need to revise the way we think about how we provide broadband to low-income individuals. And there are various programs, such as the so-called Lifeline Link-Up program that currently does it for telephony, where we need to run some pilots in order to determine how best to do it for broadband. As we're thinking about that, one should think about whether there's a spectrum-based approach that might over time be a complementary service or do other kinds of things. But we in no way had sufficient data to be able to make that a concrete recommendation. So, and I think there is a very valid question about whether that business model would work. Again, we want to be both visionary and practical. We were raising that as something that ought to be considered alongside other things that we could more confidently recommend.
Blair Levin, why in the broadband plan proposal do you call for a contiguous nationwide ban for unlicensed use?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that we focused on was what is it that we know, and what is, again, how can we make sure that there's an opportunity for technology to develop in a lot of different ways. We've seen great success with various unlicensed technologies such as Wi-Fi in terms of improving performance on broadband networks. We think that that there are various business models that compete. There's a licensed business model. There's an unlicensed business model. They tend to do different kinds of things. One of the reasons why we think having spectrum is so important is that you need to have enough so that the licensed providers can do what they need and you have the spectrum they need. But there's also an opportunity for unlicensed. And we think having a contiguous nationwide band would enable all kinds of technology and development. We also say in there that secondary uses is really important, and we have recommendations for how do you achieve greater transparency about who is currently using spectrum so that people who want a secondary use model have better information and insight into the marketplace. We don't know how these three different business models are going to evolve, but we want to make sure there's enough room for all three of them to compete with each other and to compete in other ways to provide better value and services for the American public and to improve the economy.
Next question from Lynn Stanton.
There was a criticism from the Phoenix Center earlier this week, or maybe not a criticism, but more of a suggestion that as the FCC goes forward with this plan, that its success be judged against whether the country moves up in the OECD Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development rankings for broadband penetration to number 9 from its current 15th, 16th. In the past, the Phoenix Center and some other organizations have criticized that ranking as just not really relevant or not well thought out. So what is your reaction to now being asked to be judged by?
It's a very good question, and it's a fair question. But one of the things we found when we looked at a large series of studies was that, number one should be judged on multiple factors. If you pick any one factor over any others, you're going to bias what you're actually doing. We could be number one in broadband penetration, but if our performance was the slowest in the world, if our applications were the worst, that would not be any victory. We could be the fastest in the world, but if it was $1 million a month and no one could afford it, that wouldn't be very good. So the point is you have to have a multiplicity of factors. But there's something else that we looked at, and that is the concept that early on in a technology, and this was exactly true of electricity, I think it was exactly true, by the way, of computers whereas electricity was 100 years ago, computers were 30 years ago. In the early stages, and we are in the early stages, there is something called measurement bias that economic historians have pointed to. And that is, you're measuring something based on the way you think in the past. Broadband is a paradigm-shifting technology. It is a general-purpose technology that is going to allow all kinds of things that we can barely envision today. It will take time for us to figure out what the really right metrics are. I think some folks are getting closer to it, but it generally involves a broad series of metrics rather than a single metric.
Universal Service Fund. Do you foresee a day when the Universal Service Fund will be dedicated solely to broadband and not landlines?
Right now, the Universal Service Fund is dedicated to voice. And we do foresee a day, and we are trying to hasten that day, when the Universal Service supports broadband, really broadband plus voice, because you can now get voice service over broadband. We think it's really important to do. We think actually one of the best things about doing a plan is that it enables a process where you bring lots of different stakeholders in the room together. When we started this process, there was a lot of people thought that this was really an impossible thing. But I think if you look at the reaction to the Universal Service Plan, we rolled it out a few weeks ago, actually before we actually published the plan, and you saw a wide range of folks who were very supportive of what we did. So we think that the planning process has helped drive a political consensus, not unanimity, but a consensus about the direction to go in. And we laid out a 3-stage, 10-year plan that we think gives markets and businesses time to adjust, but is very clear that we need to move to supporting broadband. I would also note that along with that, there's a somewhat obscure but very, very important regime called intercarrier compensation. We also move toward changing the way we do that, and that was basically based on voice, based on minutes. Those concepts aren't going to exist in a pure IP world. And so it's very important to change that system. And we think that if you do change that, a lot of great economic activity can evolve.
Blair Levin, both Verizon and AT&T now have expressed concern about the FCC controlling Internet services.
Look, this goes back to what you were talking about earlier with Title I and Title II. It's a very important debate to have. We didn't really engage in that debate in the planning process because that's a kind of a legal political analysis that doesn't make the planning process. We were bringing in a lot of experts, we were bringing a lot of data, we were looking at health, we were looking at education. This legal question, it's very, very important, but we didn't do that much on it. I will say that at the end of the day, from the planning perspective, we think there has to be a government agency, and we think the FCC in a lot of cases is the right government agency that has the jurisdiction to make sure that broadband is everywhere, to make sure that there are policies that assure it's affordable, that make sure that there are policies that assist with low-income folks, that make sure that we're supporting schools and healthcare facilities with connectivity. There are a variety of things. We need to make sure that spectrum is available. There are a variety of things that really, I think most people would agree, government has an appropriate role in doing those things. Look, lots of people expressed lots of different concerns. We think the plan points in the right direction. We think it's on the right side of history as to what the job is that needs to be done. And other people are going to discuss who is best suited in government to do that.
Last question.
Well, then, the next step for the Commission is to develop a timeline for doing all of the proceedings that are needed to implement the plan. What factors are shaping that timetable? Is it what's most urgent, what you can get the most impact and biggest bang for? Is it Commission resources?
And just to piggyback, does Congress need to approve the plan?
Congress does not need to approve the plan, though. There are certain core recommendations, such as incentive auctions, where Congress does need to act. But we took the view that in designing this plan, wherever we could, we were going to have the FCC do it, not go to Congress. Very quickly, in terms of implementation, there's a variety of different things that need to be done. We worked from the very beginning with all the different bureaus there in terms of an implementation schedule. So you're balancing resources, you're balancing priorities. Some things you want to start now but are going to take a long time to do because they involve processes that are very data-oriented. Some things can be done more quickly. So you'll see that when you see the actual implementation schedule come out.
Blair Levin, Lynn Stanton, thank you for being on the Communicators. The National Broadband Plan is available at cspan.org/communicators. Thanks for being with us.